to be keeping time. Jonas Moberg is has joined Trafigura, which is a world-leading independent commodity trading and logistic company. He's the head of government affairs and was previously for 11 years at the head of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative as its executive director. So from these two perspectives, he can tell us many things, and I'm sure he will in the 15 minutes that he has been entitled to. So, Jonas, please.
Thank you so much, Antoine, and good morning, hello, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join you all this way, and I think it is precisely as so many of you, and not least Jean-Pierre, have said, this is to a large extent a matter of providing leadership. Because yes, we can do more by following laws, by having the right laws and so on, but as has been illustrated, that is nowhere near enough. The problem, just to remind you a little bit, according to, for example, the International Monetary Fund, they put it at approximately costing 5% of global gross domestic product every year. And that, of course, does not factor in all the non-financial costs, if you like, in terms of undermining democracy, health, and so many other things that we have just been identifying some of in some of the working groups. At the core lies, of course, a hugely complex problem. And very simply illustrated, I think it's fair to say that it has a lot of the characteristics of what we might sometimes call a collective action dilemma or a prisoner's dilemma. If we have a beach with 9 hotels on it and they all together earn $10, if someone builds a 10th hotel, he or she will also earn money, but the total pot to all 10 now will drop from 10. It will go down. My point is, the individuals that are involved in corruption, regardless of the ethics and the law, they will financially benefit. But as a society, of course, we will lose, and we lose big time. Now, to address this, to provide that leadership is so much about collective action, about working together in new ways, or what I would describe is often amounts to innovative diplomacy. And I here really want to express my gratitude to Peter Brew on the line today, because he was the one who took me started on this journey some 20 years ago, and the leadership he provided in pointing towards that corruption is not just about following the law and compliance, it is about so much more. So thank you, Peter, and many of us you deserve thanks from many of us in that sense. Now, let me first, before I come back to that collective action leadership and what I mean by that, and give some examples of that. Yes, for companies, Jean-Pierre is absolutely right, of course. It's about following the laws, and we have become a lot better with doing that in compliance programs, but it's also indeed about ethics, about systems, about leadership, and about transparency. And transparency, I think many of you have heard the phrase, the sun can be the best disinfectant. It prevents corruption. A key thing that I think we sometimes forget with transparency is that it is very hard to argue against. So it is a notion that is easy to provide support for. So those are some of the things that needs to happen within the companies. Within our governments, we've talked about the laws. let me just touch on a couple of other aspects. One, and some of us are speaking today from a country, from Switzerland, and some of you from the UK. These are two of a number of jurisdictions that can do a lot more in terms of preventing money laundering. We need to make sure that the money can't be stacked away somewhere. Huge progress has been made, but we have a lot further to go in giving our law enforcement the resources they need to do these things. Secondly, thirdly, so in addition to the laws, in addition to the money laundering aspect, we as governments also need to, and this has also been mentioned in some of the breakout groups, need to be clearer in how we invest our pension funds. The huge progress is being made in terms of so-called ESG criteria for how we invest in environmental, social, and governance criteria. But we need to be even clearer there, and not least our state or quasi-state pension funds, trade union related, and so on, and have a lot that they can do there in being clear in the expectations on companies that they invest. Fourth aspect for governments, and some mentioned this, is in terms of development actors within the UN system, the World Bank, and so on. There is a lot we can do better in terms of promoting good practices. Sometimes we have come with double messages. On the one hand, we are desperate for increased trade and somehow send messages that anything goes. On the other hand, we try to promote high standards. We need to be clear and unequivocal in the messaging and how we promote things. The third category that we haven't really mentioned so far is civil society. The Economist recently pointed towards that only a mere 8.4% of the world's population live in democracies. Democracy is under threat. Freedoms are under threat. But civil society, the media, active campaigning groups, and so on, have a huge role to play in identifying, in shining the light, in driving change. That was my first part. Let me now then come to my second half and give some of this example. Some of you mentioned investments in Africa by Chinese or by Western companies. There is, as many of you may know, something sometimes referred to as a resource curse or a paradox of plenty, meaning that many of the world's richest countries in natural resources have actually seen poor development. There are many reasons for this, but corruption is a key one. There are other reasons as well. We see a skewed economy. We see a exchange rate that makes agriculture uncompetitive. There are a whole raft of reasons, but corruption is a key one. You see often in these countries essentially a jet stream of cash going into weakly governed institutions that can't cope, and that can fuel corruption. Now, the academia started to put the focus on this issue in, I would say, the 90s. Following that, we started to see a number of evidence-based campaigning. NGOs like Global Witness in the UK, Public Eye in Switzerland, and many others putting the finger at this issue. So evidence-based, targeted campaigning. They teamed up with big business, with some of these pension funds, with George Soros and a number of others, and started to apply the pressure on the big companies. The companies, oil and gas and mining companies, felt the pressure, felt the need to do something. Lord Brown, the then head of BP, played a key role in saying, yes, I feel the pressure. we need to do something. And he actually had a lunch with the then Prime Minister Tony Blair and said, look, we're trying to do something. We're trying to go to loan in Angola. It doesn't work. We need a collective solution. That led to the UK taking the initiative to something that has then grown into a global transparency standard called, indeed, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. It's a mouthful, but it is now, 15 years later, implemented by 53 countries, and it's essentially a revenue transparency standard, implemented by governments saying, this is how much the companies operating in our country have been paying. Now, that's not a panacea, that's not, but it is a start. If we know how much money is coming into these countries, we can do a better job in holding them to account. Let me take half a step back from this and tease out some lessons here. I come back to my main thesis that it's about leadership, and it's about leadership in working together. Because if governments are only thinking that they can provide the right laws and enforce them and job is done, they are mistaken. If companies think that they just need robust compliance programs and some good values leadership, they are mistaken. And if our angry NGOs think that it's just by digging up the dirt that they have done their job, they too, I'm afraid, are mistaken. These groups need to meet, and that is precisely what happened within the EITI. The economist called it once a curious coalition. It's not often you see angry NGOs like Global Witness with reactionary companies like ExxonMobil at the same table. Meaning, in order to find the solutions, we had to get the partners that were also the fiercest enemies around the same table. Then, I think one of our early conclusions was that you had to try to find the small practical solutions. It's the kind of, as I said, innovative diplomacy where you're looking for how far can you push the consensus at any given time. And let's not, here, I think one of the key lessons we learned is each and every sector needs different ways of communicating and a different pace. We never really had one brochure, because what works for governments does not work for companies or angry NGOs. So we had to tailor our message all the time. The pace of developing the standards also, governments wants to start first by putting robust governance in place. The NGOs needs always or often to consult their constituency, and companies are often in great need of showing concrete action. And it's only by bit delivering and understanding where all of these come from that you can achieve that continued progress, by building the trust that moves that consensus from the narrow increasingly to the meaningful. Now, it's along that journey that you really need that leadership, and we call it leadership and the heroism of quiet compromise. Why? A corporate manager does not get brownie points within his or her hierarchy for being out there in a collaborative solution like this. Diplomats are not that used to, and I was a diplomat for quite a long time, to talk to others than diplomats. They don't normally make a career on working together with angry NGOs or big companies. You make a career on writing good analysis about the Russia-China relationships. And so on it goes. So it requires leadership. It requires a determination to think outside of the hierarchies and recognize that the solutions lie in indeed in these collaborative solutions. And that is very much the key message I have today to this conversation. Thank you.